let's check out the history of the birth of Rugby League. If you do enjoy, guys, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button and hit the like button. Let's go. God, that sums up Yorkshire.
In England, Rugby League never left its cradle. It still lies landlocked in 3 northern counties: the coal and heavy woolen area of Yorkshire, the mill towns of Lancashire and the dockland of Cumberland.
Whoa, I think we should move on from these outdated stereotypes about the North and Rugby League. Looking at you, the person who brought a ferret into a Castleford game. Anyway, Rugby League is no longer the exclusive pastime for pit monkeys from Wigan. It's played all over the world, in exotic locations like France, Canada, the Pacific, and even London. But
I hope you like a different style of history. Here we go.
where did it all start? Well, to find that out, I'm going to the one place where it was born, Huddersfield. Let's start by going back to the history of rugby. Now, we've all heard the famous story of how rugby was invented when William Webb Ellis, a schoolboy at rugby school, picked up the ball during a football match and ran with it, thus inventing the sport. However, this was probably complete rubbish. Games like this have been played in the British Isles for hundreds of years, and different public schools all had their different and competing versions of the game. Rather, the first codified rules of the sport were written down at rugby school in 1845.
It's interesting, actually, because I did A-level sport. That is the one thing that we were taught about rugby, and that was that it was started because kids were playing football and one lad picked the ball up and started running with it. But actually, is that true? Not sure.
The reason why the story of William Webb Ellis probably became popular was because it legitimised the rugby school rules as the proper and official ones. You see, all the different public schools had different versions of the game and they're all trying to make their version the proper one. So by having a convenient creation myth which invented the sport, the rugby school could now lay claim to having their rules as being the official, authentic and original ones. Ex-pupils of rugby school later went on to found rugby clubs where they could continue to play the sport. The first schism came with the creation of the Football Association in 1863. The clubs who formed it preferred a game focused on kicking and dribbling rather than running and handling. In response, the Rugby Football Union was formed in 1871. It's important to note that all the founding member clubs were from either London or the home counties and had played the sport at public school. The sport soon spread to the north where it became hugely popular. In fact, it was so popular that Yorkshire had more rugby clubs than anywhere else in the country.
If anyone isn't from the UK, public schools are really private schools. I can't remember. I'm sure I've learnt it, but I can't remember why they're called public schools. But yeah, public schools are the schools that for the richer kids, and they pay to go there basically. So the upper class, middle class. Just in case you didn't know.
There was a huge influx of working class players from Yorkshire, Lancashire and Cumbria. The Yorkshire County Club, later the Yorkshire RFU, was founded in 1869 by the oldest clubs in Yorkshire: Bradford, Leeds, Huddersfield, Hull and York. In 1877, the Yorkshire Cup was created, the first competitive knockout-style cup in the UK. Although the concept of competing for a prize was hugely popular with the players and spectators of Yorkshire, it really riled up the RFU because it railed against their core value, amateurism. Amateurism was a classic Victorian public school value. It was a belief that sport should be played for pleasure, not profit, and that...
Bear in mind, so going to public school, your parents have money. You are middle class, you are upper class. You don't need to play for money. And I think that's where that stems from. You know, when you've got so much money, why do you then need to play a sport for money? You do it as a hobby. But I'm interrupting here, but you can only assume that the league then started by amateurs. They needed the money. They were working class. They would, work all week, play at the weekend. And if they've got people coming to watch, then that extra income can make the difference. Yeah, it's very much a class divide. Working class against middle and upper class.
That any money given to players would turn them into greedy, dishonest players who only cared about winning. As such, any payments from clubs to players were banned. Yorkshire was the first to implement amateurism rules in 1879.
They thought that money would create cheating and gamesmanship. Just look at football. Oh man. They weren't wrong, were they? Sadly, they weren't wrong. It has created cheating and bad professionalism and
The RFU would follow in 1886. This was difficult for the working class players who had to cover all their expenses themselves and often had to take time off work to train or play. As a result, some clubs began to offer broken time payments, which were wages given to players to compensate for the time off work. However, this was considered professionalism by the RFU and strictly banned. It's important to note, however, that the RFU often took a blind eye to payments. It just depended who was being paid. Teddy Bartram, a Wakefield Trinity player, had been receiving payments since 1879, but he was banned for life by the RFU.
Cool.
This is despite the fact that the 1888 England team all were paid as well, yet none of them were punished. One critic in 1909 complained, "The RFU turn out bag and baggage all players who wish to be recompensed for loss of working time and consequent loss of wages, and the next day are willing to allow sums of 12 shillings or 21 shillings a week for what are euphoniously described as personal and petty expenses."
It sounds a little bit like FIFA. Corrupt and not consistent with their message, and they're happy for some people to be paid, and then not happy for others to be paid. The birth of rugby league makes rugby union, back in the day, look quite bad, to be honest.
What is professionalism in a working man is evidently something very different in a player of slightly superior social status. Support for these broken time payments continued to grow throughout the 1890s, and in 1893 a number of northern clubs complained that they were vastly underrepresented in the leadership of the RFU. This meant that all their proposals would get voted down, and when they proposed that broken time payments be legalised, this was refused. Shortly after, many clubs were suspended for professionalism. It was only a matter of time before they'd start to break away. It's here at the George Hotel in Huddersfield that in 1895 22 clubs decided to break away from the Rugby Football Union and form the Northern Union. Rugby League was born. The RFU came down hard on this and banned any RFU clubs from playing against the Northern Union. In addition, any player who had played for Northern Union teams were now banned from playing in the RFU for life. However, I want to make one thing clear. This wasn't a geographical issue. It wasn't North versus South. It was about class.
Working
Frank
class
Marshall,
against
who was headmaster of Almondbury
middle and
Grammar
upper.
School in Huddersfield, was one of the fiercest inquisitors against players who had received payments. He even suspended his own club, Huddersfield. And this is what he had to say. "The working man player has not taught us anything in the way of style or skill in playing the game. Physique and stamina above the average he undoubtedly has, but to say that he knows more about the game than one who has been brought up in the best traditions of the public schools and the universities is absurd."
This is the real issue, isn't it? This is what union and league really comes down to. It is working class who don't have the money, who didn't have the money to take time off work to then go play. So compared to the middle and upper class who did have the money, so if they worked, they could take time off to play because it wasn't impacting their finances. How many things in life come down to your class? But can you blame working class people for desperate to play, but knowing that to play they need to earn the money because they're not working during the time that they're playing? You don't want to be putting your family in financial difficulty and ruins, do you? Can you blame them? And I know you've got the stories of players that didn't go to league because they didn't want to turn professional, like Bledin Williams, who I focused on before. But can you blame the ones that wanted to support their families financially? I don't think you can. And like I said, this video is certainly painting Union in a bad way.
If the case against the IRFU couldn't get any more damning, this is an extract from an official letter sent by them in 1906. The game of rugby football has always been at its best when good players were available from our public schools, and the more public school men get to play our game, the better we are certain it is for it. Before the split, clubs in Yorkshire, not including schools and universities, formed 35% of the total number of clubs in the RFU. After the split, there were just 3%. So that's how the Northern Union was formed. But how did the sport actually evolve into the one we recognise today? Well, the process began a long time ago. As early as 1892, the suggestion was made to reduce the number of players from 15 to 13. This was not, however, considered as a rule until 1906. The line-out was removed in 1897, and in 1906 the play-the-ball rule was introduced. Previously, a scrum had to be formed every time a player with the ball had been tackled.
It's a light union.
This significantly speeded up the pace of the game and made it more viewer-friendly, as often the ball was hidden from view during the scrum.
And I'll tell you what, I'm really enjoying Union, don't get me wrong, I really, really am. But I am really enjoying League as well. It's for someone that doesn't have a clue or started off not knowing anything about either, League is easier to watch, easier to follow, and in my mind, it is a faster flowing game. Not saying it's more exciting, and I'm not saying Union's more exciting. I think it depends on the match, depends on the score, depends on the teams, depends on the competition as well. But it has its positives for sure.
Perhaps the most famous aspect of rugby league, the limited tackle rule, was introduced in 1966, with each team allowed only 4 tackles. This came about as a result of a match between Huddersfield and Hull Kingston Rovers, during which Huddersfield only touched the ball twice during the entire first half. So that's been a very brief history of rugby league. I hope it's been somewhat informative for you, and hope to see you again soon.
I've been recommended this girl a few times. I'll link this video and the channel in the description below, so make sure you check it out, because she's put a different spin on it. Not necessarily a different spin, I don't think that's fair to say, but a different way of presenting it. Now obviously she's northern, so she probably has her bias towards league, I assume. But I think she puts it really, really well, actually, the way she presented. So basically, I'm getting Union was for the public schools, the middle and upper class. League was for the working class. You know, the public school kids and the upper middle class people, they had the money, so taking time off work, for example, wasn't going to impact them. Whereas the working class, you know, the miners and factory workers, if they didn't work, then they are financially possibly impacting their family. You know, they need to be able to feed their family. So can you blame them? Like I said, can you really blame them for wanting to be paid for what they do? Especially if they're getting crowds and people watching them. You can't blame them. You know, and actually I don't think it was morally wrong that they did it. It's almost more morally right that they did it, because they want to support their families. Well, let me know what you think, guys. I know a lot of you are Union fans, but I know there's League fans that subscribe as well. Let me know your thoughts. It'll be really interesting to know. Anyway, if you did enjoy, like I said, the channel is linked in the description for this lady. Discord's in the description. Make sure you join that and join the conversation as well, and you won't miss out on live streams that I do as well. I'll catch you next time.